I've been a trucker for close to 15 years now. What happened to me in the summer of 2019 still keeps me up at night. I was driving an overnight haul through the desolate plains of Wyoming, heading toward a small town in Nebraska. The route was long, lonely, and stretched for miles without a single streetlight. My headlights weren't in the best condition, something I'd been meaning to fix but kept putting off. I had driven these roads plenty of times before, but that night, the darkness felt heavier, more suffocating. I remember debating whether to pull over and wait for sunrise, but time was money, and I wasn't in a position to waste either. So I kept going, gripping the wheel a little tighter. It must have been around 3:30 a.m. when I first saw it. A shape on the road ahead, barely illuminated by my struggling headlights. Instinctively, I slammed on the brakes. My truck screeched to a halt, tires skidding against the asphalt, and my heart pounded in my chest. At first, I thought it was a dead animal. But as my vision adjusted, I realized it was a car, an old, rusted sedan, sitting dead center on the road. The hazard lights were blinking weakly, but something was off. The passenger door was wide open, swinging slightly in the wind. I sat there for a few moments, unsure of what to do. I wasn't the type to scare easily, but something about the sight gave me a deep, unsettled feeling. Maybe someone had broken down, wandered off for help, and left their car like that? But if that were the case, why was the door open? Cautiously, I put the truck in neutral and stepped out. The silence was suffocating. Even the wind seemed to have died down. The only sound was the faint click-click-click of the car's hazards. As I approached, I kept glancing around, half expecting someone to pop out of the darkness. When I reached the driver's side, I hesitated, then leaned in. The car was completely empty. No driver, no passengers, nothing but a set of keys still in the ignition. I swallowed hard, glancing back at my truck. Every part of me told me to get back inside and leave, but curiosity got the better of me. I moved toward the trunk. If there was something or someone in there, I needed to know. The moment I touched the trunk, a sound shattered the silence. A single, ear-piercing knock. Not from the car, from the darkness beyond the road. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my balance. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the night, my truck's weak headlights barely piercing the abyss. Then I saw them. A figure, standing just beyond the reach of the light. A person, not moving, just standing there, watching. I felt the air leave my lungs. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body was frozen in place. The figure was just still, too still, like they weren't breathing. Then, without warning, they took a step forward. I stumbled backward, my boots scraping against the pavement. The figure moved closer, and suddenly, I could make out more details. A man, tall and thin, dressed in ragged clothes. His face was hidden in shadow, but something about the way he walked, slow, deliberate, made my stomach churn. Then he spoke. "You shouldn't have stopped." His voice was hoarse, almost broken, like he hadn't spoken in years. Every instinct in me screamed go. I didn't bother with the trunk anymore. I turned on my heel, sprinting back to my truck as fast as I could. My hands fumbled for the door handle, my pulse hammering in my ears. As I climbed in, I made the mistake of glancing back. The man was closer, too close, and he wasn't alone. More figures were emerging from the darkness now, silent, unmoving. At least 6, maybe 7 of them, their faces obscured by the night. I jammed the keys into the ignition, my hands shaking. The engine roared to life, and just as I threw the truck into gear, I saw something that sent a bolt of ice down my spine. The first man, the one who had spoken, was smiling. Not just any smile, a knowing smile, like he had already won. I didn't wait to find out what that meant. I hit the gas, tires screeching as I peeled away. My heart was a drum in my chest, my eyes locked on the road ahead. But just as I thought I was in the clear, my headlights flashed over something lying on the side of the road, just a few feet from where the car had been. A pile of something. I only caught a glimpse before I passed it, but I knew what I saw. Clothes. Not just any clothes. Child-sized. I kept my foot on the gas, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind raced faster than my truck, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. A rusted sedan in the middle of the road. A group of silent figures emerging from the darkness. A pile of children's clothes scattered on the roadside. I wanted to believe there was a rational explanation, that it wasn't what it looked like. But the deeper part of me, the one that had kept me alive through years of long-haul trucking, whispered the truth. I had driven into something I wasn't meant to see. The highway stretched ahead in a barren, endless line. I checked my mirrors, expecting to see headlights pursuing me, but there was nothing. Just darkness. A whole world swallowed by the night. Then, just when I started to think I had escaped, my radio crackled to life. A voice. "You shouldn't have stopped." I nearly jumped out of my seat. It was him. The first man. The one who had spoken to me in the dark. But that wasn't possible. My CB radio was on a closed channel. No one should have been able to connect unless. The voice crackled again, lower this time. Almost amused. "Turn around." A chill ran down my spine. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to grab the radio. "Who the hell is this?" I demanded. "Static." And then, another voice joined in. This one softer. Childlike. "Help me." The truck shuddered as I nearly veered off the road. I pulled the wheel back, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was a kid's voice. I knew what I had seen on the roadside. Those little clothes, scattered like someone had been dragged out of them. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep my focus on the road. "Where are you?" I said into the radio, hating how unsteady my voice sounded. Silence. Then, a single knock. Not from the radio. From inside the truck. I went cold. The cab behind me was empty. It had to be empty, but I felt it now. That same unnatural stillness I had felt back at the car. I reached for the knife I kept in the door pocket. My fingers were slick with sweat. Another knock. Slow. Deliberate. Right behind my seat. I turned the wheel sharply, pulling onto the side of the road. My breath was coming fast and shallow as I forced myself to turn around. I scanning the small, cramped sleeping compartment behind me. Empty. Nothing but my old duffel bag and the blankets I hadn't bothered folding. I exhaled shakily, my grip still tight on the knife. Maybe I was losing it. Maybe the exhaustion was finally catching up to me. Then the blanket moved. I stopped breathing. Something was under there. I reached forward, my hands feeling disconnected from my body. Slowly, I lifted the edge of the blanket. A pair of eyes stared back at me. Wide, unblinking. A kid. A little girl, no older than 6 or 7, curled into a ball in the corner of my cab. Her face was streaked with dirt, her blonde hair tangled and matted. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "He's coming." The truck's engine died. The radio screeched with static. And outside, on the empty highway, someone knocked on my door. Story 2. I've been a trucker for a little over 2 years now, still new compared to the guys who've been at it for decades. The job isn't for everyone. The long nights, the endless stretches of road, the feeling that the world shrinks down to just you, your rig, and the miles ahead. But I never expected my biggest fear wouldn't come from fatigue or isolation. It came from what I found on a routine drive through Ohio. It was a little past midnight when I pulled into a rest stop along a lonely stretch of highway. I wasn't planning on staying long, just enough time to grab a quick energy drink and keep going. The stop was one of those old, forgotten places, the kind with a flickering neon sign and gas pumps that probably hadn't worked in years. As I stepped out of my truck, I noticed something off right away. The convenience store was dark, completely black inside. But the door, it was wide open. I hesitated. Maybe the clerk had stepped out for a smoke? But something about the way the door hung open, like it had been left that way, unsettled me. Still, I was tired. I needed a drink to keep going. So, I stepped inside. The air was thick, stale, like the place hadn't been aired out in years. The shelves were half empty, stocked with expired snacks and dusty canned goods. The fridge section at the back gave off a faint glow, the only source of light in the whole store. I made my way toward it, my boots crunching against something on the floor, glass, maybe. That should have been my first warning sign. Then I saw him. A man, sitting on the floor at the far end of the store, just outside the reach of the dim light. His clothes were filthy, his arms wrapped tightly around his legs. At first, I thought he was a homeless guy, maybe taking shelter for the night. Then I noticed his eyes. They were wide open, unblinking, locked onto me with this blank, vacant stare. I froze. You good, man?" No response. He didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there, staring. My gut told me to turn around and walk out, but I forced myself to step forward. "Hey, if you work here, I just need to grab something real quick." My voice came out steadier than I felt. Still nothing. I inched toward the glowing fridge, every instinct in my body screaming at me to leave. But I couldn't. Not until I knew for sure. I reached for the fridge door, the cold air spilling out as I grabbed a can from the shelf. That's when I noticed the other door. A back room, barely ajar, and beyond it, a faint glow not from a light, but from a screen. A TV? A computer? Someone was in there. I took a step forward. The air felt heavier, like the entire store was holding its breath. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw the man on the floor move. Not standing, not shifting, just his mouth, opening and closing. But no sound came out. I turned to run, screw the drink, screw everything. But the moment I did, I heard something that stopped me cold. A click. Not from the man. From the back room. I turned my head just enough to see a shadow move behind the door, just past the faint glow of the screen. Someone else was back there, and they had just locked the door. The sound of the lock clicking sent a surge of panic through me. My body tensed, heart hammering in my chest as I stood frozen in the darkened convenience store. The man on the floor still hadn't moved, except for his mouth, opening and closing, soundless, mechanical, like he was trying to speak but had forgotten how. I backed away slowly, gripping the cold can in my hand like a makeshift weapon. I needed to get the hell out of there. Now. Then, from the locked back room, a second voice spoke. A whisper. Hoarse, almost robotic. Don't let him out. I felt the blood drain from my face. Who the hell were they talking about? The man? Me? My instinct screamed at me to leave, to run back to my truck, and never look back. But something deep inside told me I needed to know what was happening here. Maybe it was stupidity. Maybe it was something else. But I had to see. I turned toward the back room. The glow from inside flickered, like the light source was a screen cycling through different images. The door was locked now, but whoever was inside, whoever had spoken, was still in there. I took another step forward. The man on the floor twitched. A violent, jerking movement, like his whole body had been yanked by invisible strings. His mouth finally stopped moving, and then he stood up. Fast. Too fast. I stumbled backward as he rose to his full height, his head lolling slightly to one side. His arms hung limp at his sides, but his eyes, those wide, vacant eyes, never left mine. Then, in perfect sync with the locked door behind me, his mouth finally made a sound. A single, guttural whisper. Help me. The lights in the fridge behind me flickered, casting his shadow long and twisted across the floor. I bolted. I didn't care about whatever mystery was behind that door. I didn't care about the eerie whispering voice or the strange, unnatural movements of the man. My body took over, legs propelling me toward the exit. The man lunged. I didn't turn around to see. I heard his footsteps slap against the tile behind me, fast and unsteady, like he wasn't fully in control of his own body. I hit the door, shoving it open with my shoulder, the humid night air slamming into me like a wall. My truck was just a few feet away. I could make it. I could. A hand grabbed my wrist. Too cold. Too strong. I whipped around and nearly screamed. It wasn't the man. It was someone else. A woman. Her face was gaunt, hollow, her eyes bloodshot. She had deep scratches along her arms, like she'd been fighting something for days. She squeezed my wrist so tight I felt my bones grind together. You shouldn't have come inside, she whispered. Then she shoved me. Hard. I hit the pavement, skin scraping against the asphalt. My vision blurred for a second, and when I looked up, the convenience store was pitch black. The door was closed. No sign of the man. No sign of the woman. Just the dark, empty store. Like no one had ever been there at all. I scrambled to my feet, heart slamming against my ribs. Without a second thought, I threw myself into my truck, locking the doors and jamming the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the darkness. The store just sat there, still and silent. I didn't wait to see if the door would open again. I peeled out of the lot, tires screeching, pushing my rig faster than I ever had before. I drove until I couldn't see the rest stop anymore. Until the memories of what I had just witnessed started to feel like a fever dream. But as I sped down the highway, my radio, which had been off the entire time, crackled to life. A woman's voice. Soft. Raspy. Don't stop next time. The radio went dead. I didn't stop driving until the sun came up. And I never stopped at another abandoned rest stop again. Story 3. I've been a trucker for nearly 15 years now, and I've seen my fair share of weird things on the road. Drunk drivers, stray animals, even people walking along highways where no one should be. But what happened to me 4 years ago on a stretch of road in Montana? I still don't have an explanation for it. It was a long-haul job from North Dakota to Idaho, an overnight trip that I figured I could knock out in one go. The roads were empty, just me, my truck, and miles of open highway stretching into the darkness. I was running on fumes, exhaustion settling into my bones, but I was determined to make it to my destination. To stay awake, I reached into the glove box for my smelling salts, something an old trucker buddy had introduced me to. A sharp inhale, a jolt to the brain, and I'd be alert again. But just as I was about to take a whiff, something fluttered across the road. A dress, just lying there in the middle of the highway. I slammed on the brakes, my truck skidding slightly before coming to a halt. My heart was hammering, my exhaustion momentarily replaced by cold adrenaline. Who leaves a dress in the middle of the road? I rubbed my eyes, blinking hard to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. But there it was, a pale blue dress, billowing slightly in the night breeze. A few feet ahead of it, I spotted something else. A single shoe. My stomach turned. I sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel. Every instinct in me was screaming drive. Ignore it. Keep going. But there was something about it, something deliberate, that made my skin crawl. I stepped out of the cab, my boots crunching against the gravel. The air was ice cold, the kind of chill that seeped into your bones. As I moved closer to the dress, I noticed something that made my breath catch. There was a trail. More clothes. A small jacket. A second shoe. And further down the road, barely visible in the dim glow of my headlights, a figure, standing at the edge of the trees. I stopped dead in my tracks. They were too far for me to make out details, but I could tell it was a person. Small, motionless, watching me. A child? My blood turned ice. Hey, I called out, my voice too loud in the silent night. No response. No movement. Just the still, quiet road and that distant figure standing too perfectly still. Then, it moved. Not forward. Not backward. Just sideways. Gliding, not walking parallel to the road, disappearing deeper into the trees. I swallowed hard, every muscle in my body tensed. That wasn't normal. I should have left then and there. Should have climbed back into my truck and driven until I saw the sun. But I didn't, because right as I turned to head back, a child's voice, soft and trembling, spoke from the dark. Please, help me. And then the screaming started. The scream cut through the night, sharp and piercing, like a blade slicing into my spine. It came from the trees. I whipped around, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure, the one that had been standing at the tree line, was gone. But the scream hadn't. It echoed in the silence, bouncing off the trees, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. I was breathing hard now, every muscle in my body tensed. Another scream. Closer this time. My instincts told me to run, to get back in my truck, slam the door shut, and drive until I hit civilization again. But I couldn't ignore that voice. Please, help me. The clothes in the road. The tiny shoe. It felt like a trap. But what if it wasn't? What if there really was a kid out there? Against every survival instinct I had, I stepped forward. The trees loomed ahead, a dark wall swallowing the highway. I could still hear the scream, warping into something distorted, like it was being played through an old, broken speaker. I took another step, then another, and then I saw it. A small shape curled at the base of a tree, barely visible in the shadows. A little girl. Her hair was tangled, her face streaked with dirt. She was wearing nothing but a thin nightgown, her tiny fingers clutching at the fabric as she shivered. My stomach dropped. Hey, kid. Her head snapped up. My words died in my throat. Her eyes, they weren't right. Wide, glassy, reflecting the dim glow of my truck's headlights like an animal caught in the dark. I took a shaky breath. Are you okay? What happened? She just stared. Then, slowly, she opened her mouth. Too wide. Wider than any human should be able to. And the scream, the same one I had heard before, came pouring out. I stumbled backward, my body reacting before my mind could. That was her? That impossible, warp scream? I turned to run, finally listening to my instincts. But then I saw the others, lurking in the trees. At least 6 of them, just standing there. Small figures. Children. Their bodies twisted in unnatural ways. Their limbs too long, their heads tilted at strange angles, mouths hanging open but no sound coming out anymore. The screaming had stopped. They were all watching me. I ran. I didn't care if it was a trick, if it was my mind playing games, I ran. My boots pounded against the pavement, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My truck was just ahead. I could make it. Then I heard footsteps. Not running. Chasing. Fast. Inhumanly fast. I threw myself into the cab, my hands fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life just as something slammed into the side of my truck. I didn't look. I couldn't. I threw it into gear, tires screeching against the pavement as I peeled away, the highway stretching endlessly ahead of me. I drove until the sun rose, until my body was numb with exhaustion and my mind felt raw from the fear. Only then did I dare glance in the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. No figures, no children, no sign that anything had ever been there at all. But there was something else. Something that made my stomach twist into knots. My passenger side window. A tiny handprint, smeared against the glass. Too small to be an adult's. Too fresh to be from anyone but them. I never took that route again.